Hi everyone, and welcome to Skincare and Beyond, Face the Future's podcast. I'm Julia Barker-Thompson from Face the Future, and today we're going to talk about a topic that affects millions and millions of people, but actually is still full of myths and misconceptions. I'm joined today by Joe. Hi, Joe.
Hi, how's it going?
Welcome. Yeah,
Thank you.
Really pleased to have you here. And Joe's actually going to be helping us have a look at the science. Is also going to be helping us identify facts from fiction, a couple of practical tips for people, and hopefully enable us all to feel really confident in our skin, no matter what stage of life you're at. So, Joe, let's first of all find out a little bit about you.
Yeah.
So tell us about your role at Deciem, and of course, they're the brand behind The Wonderful Ordinary. And also I know that one of your roles there, or the main role there, is science communication, which I was saying earlier, I hadn't really heard about. So just talk us through a bit about the role as well.
It is a bit of a niche one. It's a kind of area that a lot of people have maybe not heard of before. So I often kind of in simple terms like to talk about it as translating the complexity of science behind skin and skincare into really accessible knowledge so that everyone's able to have access to that information. My kind of background is in cosmetic science. So I studied university. I did an MSc in cosmetic science. I did a placement year within technical and new product development for a company. And then after that, during my last few years on the course, I actually joined Deciem, The Ordinary, Parents of The Ordinary. And I actually worked in our stores. And I think that was really, really useful for me to be able to connect to who our consumers were and to know what their unique needs were. And I worked in 3 different stores in London. And then eventually when I graduated, I actually moved into our learning and development team. So education team, training our products, training our staff members, working with our partnerships, and eventually then transitioned into scientific communications team. And so that was really the kind of perfect bridge for me. It was bringing that kind of educational piece, that teaching aspect into the scientific part that my kind of background is a little bit more based in. So it's something that I find really exciting. It's very varied. One day I will be all day in Google Scholar, understanding how the skin's working, what's the most recent advances, digging really deep into a topic, right through to sitting here with you today, talking about a really important topic. And so it's very varied. And I think one of the things that I always really want to ensure is that everybody has access to that information. And I think that's why we put our scientists at the forefront, to make sure that we're able to really answer all the questions and give the information that people need to make those informed decisions. So yeah, that's a little bit about my background and kind of how I got into scientific communications.
Oh, brilliant. And that role seems perfect for The Ordinary because you are known for your transparency and accessibility.
Yeah.
So with that being part of your mission, how do you ensure that that actually shows up when we talk about skincare, and specifically when it's skincare that's so personal? And we're talking about menopause, when menopause is so personal and different for every individual.
Yeah, I think one of the really big things is coming back to that education piece. Like, we always have believed that people should have access to the information that they need to make informed decisions. And as you say, it's a very kind of emotional and very personal area to navigate. And lots of areas in skincare are, this is our skin that the whole world sees, right? It's our manifestation of who we are, and we can feel very self-conscious about that. So when it comes to decision making, there's the emotional and the logical aspects that come into it. And so what we really try to prioritize in The Ordinary is, how do we kind of provide that logic, that information for people to be able to navigate and understand these topics more easily, so that that's one area that they don't have to worry about. They're able to have that information to be able to make the decisions, and it's then more navigating that kind of emotional part of it, but also making sure that people feel empowered as well by having that information, being able to understand their skin, and actually this is a normal process that everyone will kind of go through. And those changes that we see are not out of the blue. They're not strange. They're not abnormal. It's about how we can best support people through the concerns that they have, and also recognizing that everybody is very different as well. So not everyone is going to have the same experience. So a little bit of a kind of all-rounder there, but I think by prioritizing education, it's giving people the tools that they need to be able to navigate those situations a little bit more easily, without the kind of shroud of uncertainty that often comes by navigating such complex complex topics.
Yeah, and that's it. It is complex, isn't it?
Yeah.
So let's dive into skin biology then.
Yes,
Let's
indeed.
do some education. In terms of menopause, we talk about 3 typical stages, perimenopause, menopause, and then postmenopause. Talk to me about how the skin typically changes in those stages.
100%. So I think the first thing that I want to just acknowledge is that in order to understand how the menopause happens, we do often split it down into these 3 sections, but I also just want to acknowledge that these changes will be happening throughout. It is more of a gradual process. And while you might notice more specific elements changing kind of maybe more rapidly in some areas, it is not something where you're going to wake up one day in the kind of menopause directly and notice that those changes have happened overnight. So I know that feels really obvious, but these changes, we talk about them and how they affect different stages of the menopause, but you will see them happen throughout. What we kind of look at when it comes to the menopause is how the changing hormones will impact the skin. And the hormones that, estrogen and progesterone, those particularly are the 2 kind of most prominent ones that we talk about during menopause. They have a huge impact on the skin. If you look at estrogen, it's really important in helping with skin repair. So things like collagen and elastin, for example, helping to protect those as well, supporting with the synthesis of hyaluronic acid, for example, which helps with hydration. And also with the repair and the renewal aspect of the skin. So all of the things, and we'll talk a little bit about how that impacts like the skin and the visual aspects as well. And then you also have progesterone as well. And progesterone, as that decreases, that's where we often see changes to sebum. So often another aspect of the kind of menopause that we often will experience.
So just for our listeners that don't know what sebum is,
yes,
can you explain that?
Yeah, so we'll get a lot deeper into this later on. But sebum is essentially the oil just that our skin produces. Yes. So as you throughout the day will maybe get shiny in areas such as the nose or the forehead, sometimes the chin area, that's sebum that our skin is producing. And we'll come back to why our skin produces that, because there's a lot of misinformation out there and some myths.
Oh, I love you busting myths.
Same. It's my favorite part of the job. So those are the kind of 2 key hormones that we look at, the estrogen and the progesterone. And as we've kind of just discovered, massively involved in the skin's natural functions. The perimenopause is often kind of categorized or it's spoken about as the 8 years leading up to menopause. And so this is where we start to see those hormones declining in the kind of concentrations or levels. And as you can imagine, that does start to then have an impact on the skin. So this will have an impact on things like the production of collagen, the structure molecules that hold our skin up, also elastin, which is providing that elasticity to our skin. And so as these changes occur, we might start to see kind of fine lines, wrinkles, loss of firmness or elasticity, or even kind of some sagging that starts to take place in those early years. And so that will start to kind of maybe gently increase slightly, I would say, over those years. But also the skin's renewal process slows as well. So that renewal process is something that happens at the bottom layer of the top layer of the skin. Every approximately 28 days, the skin will renew itself. And so that means that you're constantly getting a supply of fresh new skin cells that reach the surface. As this slows down, it may impact the skin's natural exfoliation and the natural renewal process, which therefore can make the skin look a little bit more dull or drier, or can impact hydration of the skin. And so there's a number of ways in which that skin slowing of the renewal process also impacts it. So those are the kind of typical things that we often see during perimenopause. And they will continue until we reach menopause. Now, menopause is categorized by 12 months with the absence of periods, essentially. And so during that stage, this fact blew my mind. But in the 5 years after menopause, we can often see that the skin loses up to 30% of its collagen, which is quite considerable. Yes. And so all of those things that we've just talked about during perimenopause, you may notice them starting to accelerate and become a little bit faster during this period. And that's where we then see kind of 15 years afterwards, we get around about 2% collagen decline per year from there on afterwards. Another thing that I will bring in here as well is pigmentary changes inside the skin. And these happen throughout, but you may notice them kind of more towards the perimenopausal end or the kind of menopausal stage. And what we know is that menopausal women are more likely to experience hyperpigmentation or sunspots, for example, in response to UV exposure. We don't fully understand that it's the direct cause of the hormonal changes, but that certainly plays a role within it. Yes. This is often why you might see an increase in age spots or sunspots that are talked about, or areas of hyperpigmentation pop up, for example, and kind of more concerns with that than you may have experienced at other points during in your life. And then there's the sebum aspect as well. So we often see a decrease in sebum. For some people, if you're an oily skin type, that can be a benefit because it's actually kind of helping to kind of keep a more matte finish to the skin. But for some people, that can actually kind of lead to a massive reduction in kind of excess oil. And that does impact the skin as well. Again, I'm not going to dig too deep into it because I want to talk a whole piece around this topic as well. But those are the kind of changes we see. And then during the postmenopausal period, we just see the continuation of that essentially. So I think I've kind of touched based on most of the things here that we have occurring during menopause. There are other aspects, things like facial flushing that occurs, etc. But they are...
Don't talk too much about that because you asked us a question, didn't you, to ask our listeners?
Yes.
And that's come up as one of the questions. So don't do any spoilers just yet.
I'll pause on that one for the moment. So yeah, I feel like that was kind of more of a holistic approach to how that changes and not so much stage by stage, but I kind of try to avoid talking so categorically about it because while that we do see those changes occur at different stages, it is more of a holistic approach throughout that stage of life. Yeah. And then a final thing to mention as well is the dryness that often is increasing during these years as well. So the skin kind of decreases its ability to hold on to water for a number of different reasons. Reduced levels of natural moisturizing factors or ceramides, which are these molecules that hold and stop water leaving the skin. And so that can also lead to dryness inside the skin, can contribute to increased sensitivity, which I'll talk a little bit about later as well. But that's another kind of textbook or characteristic sign that we see inside the skin during this kind of change as well.
Brilliant. So we've just talked about the 3 typical stages of menopause. But of course, there's other internal processes and factors in play. So can you just talk me through some of those internal processes, specifically around whether it's hormonal changes, structural changes, there's so much going on.
Yeah, so I kind of briefly touched earlier on about how estrogen and progesterone involved in the kind of factors or the functions of some of the skin. And so to kind of go back to that, when we see the decline, particularly in estrogen, it massively impacts things like the collagen production or the protection of collagen and also elastin as well. And so I often talk about collagen as being the kind of scaffolding of the skin. It's what holds the skin up. And then elasticity is helping with the elastic properties. So when you stretch your skin, it kind of reforms back to its original shape. That's really kind of coming from the elastin as well in particular. So as these molecules decline, what we see is that the structures holding the skin up decrease, which can lead to reduced density inside the skin, a lack of firmness or reduction in firmness, a loss of kind of elasticity to some degree. And this can then also, gravity's not our best friend. So that all of those factors together can actually then lead to the kind of more sagging that we often see in the skin as it loses that elasticity. So those are kind of some of the more structural things that we see. The other thing that plays into that then as well is fine lines and wrinkles as well. So there are kind of 2 angles that we talk about when it comes to skincare there. One of them being things like expression lines that form, and that is kind of independent of the changes we see during menopause. But the other aspect is things like lines and wrinkles that are formed from that reduced structure as well. So if you imagine it holding your skin up, when we lose some of those structures, that gives an opportunity for the skin to kind of droop almost or fall into a kind of fine line or a wrinkle. And over time, that will kind of become deeper or kind of more apparent or longer, for example. And so that's how we really kind of see this change happening with the signs of aging that we typically associate. The other aspect that we talked about a little bit was the skin's renewal process. So as that slows down, it actually slows the renewal of the skin, and that affects how we see the skin surface. So a little bit of a sidetrack here, but the skin has a natural exfoliation process, and we call that desquamation. And so when we always talk about kind of exfoliators in skincare, and I often hear people saying exfoliation is fundamental. That's one of the things that really annoys me, is because we have spent hundreds, if not thousands of years, our skin evolving to have its natural process. But that process revolves around optimal skin hydration. Okay. So when our skin's not hydrated properly, it's not renewing as effectively. And so because we see this decline in hydration inside the skin, that also impacts the renewal process. And that's where we then get the buildup of skin on the surface of the skin, which is affecting how the light reflects. And that then leads to this perception of dullness or texture or uneven skin because we've not got that smooth finish from the natural exfoliation cycle of the skin. So a bit of a sidetrack there, but that skin renewal aspect of slowing, we often don't talk about when it comes to it, but that really impacts how we see the skin itself, as well as not just things like the fine lines and wrinkles. And then, as I mentioned, lastly, the dryness piece. Our skin has natural molecules inside. When we talk about the skin barrier, we talk about a few different components. One being the physical barrier of the cells themselves that keep that water in. The other two aspects are what we call about the hydration element of it, the humectants, and these are often our natural moisturizing factors found in the surface layers. But we also have things like hyaluronic acid that you might have heard in skincare. And they are basically massive water magnets. They attract and they hold onto water to keep the skin hydrated. The other component to that is the lipid part. And so the lipids, when we talk about lipids, they're oil-like molecules essentially, and they work to help trap water inside. And so these two different components work really well together. But as we age and during menopause, the changing hormones can impact the production of those components. And so it does mean that the skin's ability to hold on to water actually declines with age, and the actual barrier of the skin becomes slightly weaker. So that allows more water to leave, leading to the dehydration and dryness, but also allows more irritants to enter the skin because the barrier is not as strong. And again, we will come back to that, but that's kind of playing there into the kind of sensitivity piece that we often talk about.
And that's really interesting, because there is some things. We were talking earlier about AI, weren't we? Yeah. And about, you just put a Google search in and some of the stuff that comes up. So when you were talking about fine lines and wrinkles, elasticity, hyaluronic acid, I think those are the things that most people that look at change to the skin during menopause will be aware of. But I found it really interesting when you're saying actually some of it as well, you help get the badness in and everything out. Yeah. Is there any other changes that you think that they're less commonly known but should actually get some more noise around?
Yeah, 100%. So I think there is one of these pieces is the sensitivity and almost the sensations that happens as you go through this stage as well. Kind of facial flushing can become a lot more apparent, which I know that somebody has sent in some questions around that, so we'll come back to that. But we also often will see a change in sensation. So some people might experience kind of, I don't remember the scientific name for it now. This is not my full level of science. I'm the skincare nerd behind it, so I'm not going to get into the medical side of things.
They won't hold it against you.
But we often will see like kind of the skin can feel sensations. So often people will talk about kind of the feeling of insects crawling over the skin, or the itching, or kind of uncomfortable sensations that come with it. There's a few different kind of things that can contribute to that. One of them being the skin barrier as well. Yeah. And so that's where you might find that stronger skincare may actually cause irritation for you. You may have not experienced sensitivity before, but you may start to. And even products that you have used for many years may start to cause irritation for you for the first time.
We do get a lot of customers ringing up to customer services saying they've used something for a long time and all of a sudden they can't use it anymore.
Yeah. And so that's a reflection of the kind of skin barrier allowing more of those molecules into the skin, potentially causing irritation. So we'll come back to that again later on, but how to navigate those situations and how to best approach it as your skin is changing. We also will see that often changes to facial hair will take place as well. So often people will talk about an increase in the visibility of certain areas of facial hair in particular. So that's another thing that's quite common. And Also, something that changes is the ability for the skin to repair itself as well. And so this plays into the signs of aging piece, but also when it comes to things like cuts and bruises, they might become more apparent and take longer to heal as well. So this is a kind of normal thing that we see in kind of menopausal skin. And the last thing to mention is also acne as well. I think this is a really interesting kind of topic because a lot of research shows that acne occurs at much lower levels in menopausal women, but it's actually scientifically classified as its own type of acne. And that's because you do get some people who may not have experienced acne before and start to experience it during those menopausal years. And again, this is reflective of the kind of hormonal changes. Again, the same reason why we may experience kind of breakouts around the kind of certain times of the month when those hormone changes take place throughout the menstruating years as well. So kind of really such a big variety. And I think one of the things I will say here is that we often talk about all the common signs of menopause, and even some of these kind of less well-known ones you may kind of hear about and talk about, but everybody's single skin is individually different. And so your experience of menopause is going to be different to the person sat next to you. And just because you're not experiencing or you are experiencing some of these, it doesn't mean that your experience is not kind of any different. And it's everybody is guiding that path, their own individual journey. And we'll talk about how to kind of navigate that when you're deciding what's right for you later on as well.
Yeah. You're so right. Everybody's journey is very valid because it's their journey. And when you were talking about the acne and the hormonal changes in the skin that can cause that, one of the most frustrating things for me is when you hear people saying, but acne is only for teenagers. Yeah. And you think, well, actually it isn't. I mean, we're talking about menopause and we know that it's part of that, but actually it can happen at any stage in your life. So when someone says, I thought you only got acne when you were a teenager, you're like, oh, how much more education do we need to do?
100%.
So let's just roll it back because you've given us an awful lot of information. I found it absolutely fascinating. Some stuff I was already aware of, as you'd expect, and other bits that, I didn't really know that. Let's try and make it really simple for our listeners. Yes. So we've got some listeners that are actually on their menopause journey, whatever stage it is, and they are starting to notice these changes to their skin. So to keep it really simple, what type of things would you recommend or suggest that our listeners try if they want to introduce something simple into their skincare routine?
I think the first thing that I want to touch on is cleansing. This is a really kind of fundamental part of any skincare regimen. And I know that sometimes after a long day, it can be really time consuming and feel like the biggest task on earth to take makeup off. So often we kind of end up using things like makeup wipes or micellar waters with cotton pads because it's just easier than having to actually do the full cleanse. Yeah. One of the things I would mention is that when we're using things like foaming washes or any kind of cleansers, the molecules that are doing the cleansing can actually disrupt the skin barrier. So when we're washing our face, we're using them to cleanse away the excess kind of debris and dirt and oils, and then we're rinsing them away. But when we're using things like a micellar water or a kind of makeup wipe, those are being left on the skin. And so they can actually contribute to disruption of the skin barrier, which we know, as we've already talked about, is a kind of not as strong in menopausal skin and needs that extra bit of love. And so my biggest recommendation when it comes to the dryness side of things for menopausal skin is to switch over to a cleanser. But the real hack here is using a microfiber cleansing cloth. So for me, using something like a squalane cleanser would be great. It's that balm-like texture. It's still going to provide that moisturization, removes your makeup, even waterproof and SPF, etc. And it turns milky and rinses away. But when you get your washcloth involved, it makes it so simple and easy, kind of two wipes and you're good to go. I promise you, if you give it a go, it will take as little time, if not less time, than your makeup wipes or your kind of micellar waters. So that's a really first fundamental step that is a really simple one to make, but will make a massive difference in terms of how your skin keeps moisture.
Before you move on to your next step, are you a fan of double cleansing?
I think it really depends on your needs and also the energy capacity that you have, right? I think one of the things that I often get is my mum mum has just started getting into skincare. I've worked in skincare for 11 years and she's had skincare sat on the side that then the next year later I end up throwing away because she's never used. Finally got into it and now is asking lots of advice and all of her friends are asking. Nice. So I'm building out skincare regimens, but the biggest thing I always look at is how much time and energy do you have to give to your skincare? Because I can give you a skincare regimen with 10 steps in it, but if that's beyond your capacity, you're not going to do any of it. So I think for those people who are really interested and have the time to give to their skin, double cleansing is great. It gives that opportunity to really do the first removal, which is getting rid of all the dirt and debris. And then that second step is just helping to really give the skin a good clean as well. But for some people, this is myself, I don't have the energy. At the end of a long day, I want it to be done as soon as possible. So I will go for something like a squalane cleanser, which does both steps in one for me. So it's really dependent on you. A double cleanse is great if you are wearing a lot of heavier makeup or SPF, but it's not an essential part of a regimen. You can just do a single cleanse, especially if you're using the right kind of cleanser for it.
Brilliant. And cloth or flannel?
So I personally like a microfiber. A little bit of a nerdy fact for you, but microfiber cloths are actually negatively charged. And so what that means is that any of the kind of positively charged molecules on the surface or dirt or debris is actually attracted to the cloth. So that's why they're, for me, particularly good at removing things like makeup and SPF, because you could use it with just water and it would do a great job, but just adding that cleanser in, it gives that extra level of removal. So for me, I prefer microfiber. I also find it a little bit more gentle as well. Some flannels can be quite abrasive on the skin, so they can cause a little bit of kind of irritation sometimes as well.
And extra dryness.
Yes, exactly. So the other thing that I always think is a really important one is SPF. And hopefully everyone's already using their SPF. So I'm should be hopefully barking up the wrong tree here. But if you're not using an SPF, this is a fundamental aspect of taking care of the skin. All of these things that we've talked about, they're exacerbated by the sun. In fact, the sun UV rays are estimated to account for between 80 and 90% of aging and the depletion of collagen and elastin. So that SPF is that really important stage to protect the skin against further kind of damage. And any other skincare that you're then using, it's allowing it that time to be able to do its job. So using your SPF every morning, even on days when it's cloudy or when you're going to be inside, trust me, that UV gets through the windows, it gets through the clouds, it gets through everything. And it's that UV that's getting through the clouds and the windows that is actually contributing to that collagen decline directly. So it's really important to use every day. When it's really particularly sunny, reapplying throughout the day. Ideally, we should be doing it every day, but particularly on those kind of sunny days when you're going to be out. Often people will ask about what SPF do you recommend? And my recommendation is to try as many SPFs as you can and find what works right for you. Because again, for me, it's all about what I talk about, lowering the activation energy, the energy that it takes to do an activity to make it become a habit. And if you find the right SPF that's easy to use and fits right with you, you're more likely to use it every day. And then when it comes to other ingredients to look at, the kind of two that I would talk about would be retinoids and peptides as an alternative for those who might find retinoids a little bit too strong. Retinoids are really quite fundamental. We'll talk a bit more about those in more detail shortly, but they're really great to helping to renew the skin. They're often seen as like the gold standard when it comes to anti-aging, and they target many of these factors that we've just talked about during menopause when helping to kind of improve the appearance of the skin. And then peptides often tend to be a little bit more gentle, more tolerated by a wider group of people. And these are more targeted. They are able to be built and designed into molecules that can do very specific functions as well.
Okay, brilliant. So let's talk about the ordinary specific products then. And let's start with the GF15 solution. Now, this involves the growth factors that I'm sure you'll be telling us more about. But what makes growth factors so compelling in skincare, and specifically in terms of the context of menopause?
So growth factors are naturally occurring within the body. They play a foundational role in the kind of natural healing and repair processes that we kind of have happen when collagen broken down or when we get a wound that happens. They are there. They're some of the first molecules to help with the repair of the skin. As we age, just with like anything else, and also during menopause, when we see these changes to hormones, we see a decline in these kind of molecules, and this contributes to that decline in repairing that we kind of talked about earlier on. So these growth factors are actually human identical. They are designed to mimic the effects of the ones that we naturally produce inside our body. And so we have 3 different types of the growth factors inside this product. We have IGF, EGF, and TGF, just in case anyone's nerdy out there and wants to look a little bit deeper into it. But effectively, this product was kind of designed to help give access to growth factors. The reason personally I find this one so exciting for us is it's a really great example of the ordinary, kind of what we talk about democratization. If you look at the market landscape before we launched GF 15%, you often see that growth factor products were in the hundreds of pounds. Yes. And so to be able to launch ours at 15%, which is a very high concentration, for £13.50 is a really kind of big step for us. Yes. You know, as science advances, we believe that access to that science should as well. So on that front, a kind of really exciting moment to be able to give access to a technology that might have been out of reach for a lot of people traditionally, to be able to give that to as many people as possible. But as I talked about, really good at helping to support the skin's natural repair processes. So we did some incredible testing on this, and one of the reasons that we have talking about this product today is we tested it on a panel of postmenopausal women as well. So we wanted to make sure that we had those results in that kind of subset of the population. And we got really great results from it. So within 1 week, we saw clinical improvements in nearly all of the parameters that we did. And then we did the testing over 10 weeks as well and got some really incredible numbers with it. So targeting the kind of lifting effect that we talked about, firmness, elasticity, fine lines and wrinkles in multiple different areas of the face, texture, smoothness, evenness of tone, hydration, all of these things that we've talked about, we looked at for this product specifically. So we wanted to make sure that we were targeting all those areas in that as well, and measuring the results that we get from it. And it got to the point where we put our before and afters up on our social channels. We actually had people calling us out and saying that we photoshopped the images. And one of the things that we are really important about The Ordinary is that when we're using our clinical before and afters, they're always average improvements. So those weren't the best that we'd seen.
So you would have done a better job of photoshopping them if you were going to do that.
Yes, exactly. We would have done
the best ones.
Even stronger. So I think that's kind of one of the things, is that we saw really visible results on this. And GF 15%, I'm not menopausal, but it is a kind of fundamental product in my skincare regimen as well, because we talk about often anti-aging, but actually this molecule is about skin repair. So that does make it great at helping to target signs of aging, but because it's having this more holistic approach at helping to support the skin's natural repair mechanisms as well.
Brilliant. And you mentioned that you use 3 different types of growth factors. Why have you used 3 different types?
So there are different growth factors that have different roles within the skin, and they all work slightly different ways. I can't get too deep into the technicalities, unfortunately. I'd love to be able to, but I know that our legal team will be slapping me on the wrist. But really,
giving away trade secrets.
It's not so much the trade secrets. It's just that we want to make sure that we have seen the studies and we believe in them ourselves, but we want to make sure that that is concrete. We don't want to go out to consumers with information that doesn't always have as much literature around it. But these different growth factors will work in different areas. So supporting the natural renewal of the skin surface, some of them working more in that area, some of them working on helping to soothe the skin in some areas. But there's an area of overlap between them as well. And they all work together in slightly different ways to holistically approach that rather than just targeted in specific areas.
Brilliant. And the other product that I want to talk about, and I know we said we'll dig deeper, and you've mentioned retinoids already, is you're actually creating quite a big buzz at the moment around your retinol 0.2%. So why is retinol a standout ingredient, specifically in the more mature skin?
When we talk about retinoids, and when I talk about retinoids, it's the name that we give to the kind of group or the family of ingredients within vitamin A. So that will include things like tretinoin, which you might be aware of, which is the active form, but it'll also include things like retinol, retinol esters. So you may have seen something like retinol palmitate or acetate, things like that as well. But retinol is probably one of the most least well-known of the retinoids. retinoids. And it's actually more direct acting than retinol. Yes. So what we talk about when it comes to retinoids is the kind of the process of conversion to its active form. When we look at retinol actually has to go through 2 conversions to become the active form of vitamin A to do its job. It does have some antioxidant properties as it is, but to really do its job, it's got to be converted twice in the skin. Retinol is that first conversion step. So retinol becomes retinal, and retinal becomes the active form. So by using retinal, we're actually getting more efficient delivery of the active form to the skin. It doesn't need to, it skips one of those conversion steps. And so that's why you might see retinol products up to 1% on the market, but actually 0.2% for retinal is one of the higher levels that you will get in skincare because of that efficiency. And so retinol, just like other retinoids, fantastic at helping to support skin's natural collagen and elastin and improving the renewal of the skin. And in doing that, it will target all of these things that we've talked about: fine lines, wrinkles, elasticity, firmness, uneven tone, the dullness, the dryness. All of these aspects can contribute into it as well. So, yeah.
Is there anything that our listeners that are, going it through whatever stage of menopause should potentially avoid using?
I'm nervous to kind of talk about avoiding directly because everyone's skin is different and I don't want to kind of paint a brush.
Yes.
But it is also, as we mentioned earlier on, as the skin barrier kind of isn't as strong, as it kind of tends to become a little bit more fragile over time, you may find that stronger ingredients may be more likely to cause irritation. It's very important to be mindful of that as you're navigating, to really be cautious with your skincare when introducing new products in. Fragrances in particular can be more likely to cause irritation. So being mindful of that, but also even the skincare that you're currently using, right? If you're using stronger ingredients, as that skin barrier allows more and more in, you might find that products that you've been using for a while are more likely to elicit that kind of irritation response inside the skin. So just really kind of navigating with caution, respecting your skin, not overloading it, if you're adding in new products one at a time to make sure that they're working for you, patch testing, all of these things to make sure that your skin is able to navigate that effectively. And also listening to your skin. I think we have a habit of kind of seeing a skincare regimen of 4 products and thinking that's exactly what I need to do every day. But if you're getting to day 3 and your skin's irritated, take a pause on that retinoid and come back to it. You don't need to go in to the same way that somebody else has. You need to listen to your skin, find out what its needs are and adjust accordingly.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's really important. Listen to your skin. Don't just follow, what someone's telling you. So we've just gone through some of the facts and some of the science behind what happens to the skin during the different stages of menopause. But there's loads of myths and there's loads of misconceptions. So if you were able to bust some of those myths, Jo, which ones would you like to get rid of first?
So this is one that is broader, but very relevant during the menopause, and that's around the role of sebum in the skin. So we've talked about the fact that sebum declines during the menopausal years. But actually what you will often hear is that sebum helps to moisturize the skin. So you often hear this narrative that as sebum production decreases, those skin's natural oils, it reduces the skin's ability and contributes to the dryness. But what's really interesting is that when you dig deeper into the science, there's actually a lack of evidence to combine the sebum to hydration. So what we look at is when we find research that looks at different areas of the bodies, you will see different levels of sebum production and also different levels of hydration and skin barrier throughout. And we don't see always a correlation between sebum levels and hydration. There are some areas where you'll have the same sebum levels, but the hydration levels will differ or vice versa. There is some research that shows that those with oily skin types have the same levels of hydration or sometimes lower levels of hydration than those who don't have oily skin. So while we think that sebum, this natural oil, provides this hydration role and this ability to hold water inside the skin, there's actually very little evidence to prove that. What we do see is that sebum actually plays a protective role. So one of the things that we do see, and there is some very early, and it's not concrete research, but I find this very interesting, is that sebum production tends to increase with UV exposure.
Right.
And it also peaks during the daytime. And so why? We're exposed to all of the environmental stresses during the day. So we actually find that sebum contains vitamin E, coenzyme Q10, and squalene, which you may have not heard of squalene. You might have heard of squalane.
Yes.
It's a very close cousin to squalane, but it actually has very strong antioxidant properties.
Right.
So sebum's main role is to protect the skin against environmental stresses, against free radicals. And so as we see that decline with age and during the menopause, as we see those changes in hormones, that reduction in sebum is actually more likely to contribute to the signs of aging that we see progressing, as opposed to the hydration. That hydration is more determined by the lipids that are found inside the skin, those oil-like molecules inside that support the skin barrier, as opposed to those oils or that sebum that we see on the surface of the skin, which is providing that protective effect.
Gosh, that's really interesting, because actually, when we think about common myths, I remember complaining about, so I'm obviously in the middle of perimenopause still, I think. As you say, you go into the stages without really knowing. And I was talking about the structure of my face and the fact that I do sag here. And the amount of people that said to me, sagging's inevitable. I'm like, well, it doesn't have to be, we can give Mother Nature a helping hand. But you're saying actually it's more sometimes than just the collagen and the elasticity. There's so much more at play.
100%. And I think, that's just the sebum, but the skin also has its own natural antioxidants that are produced inside the skin. Those also decline with age as well. So we often don't necessarily talk or give as much weight to things like antioxidants, but they're also really important. So there's so many different factors that play into this. And I think another kind of myth that pops up is that these are all inevitable. And it's like, they're not all inevitable. No. They are a natural part of the aging process, and you'll start to see those happening. But also your SPF, you're adding in your skincare ingredients, they can help to minimize the development of these. And as long as you're using your SPF really strongly, and then you're giving the skin the things it needs, you can actually really slow or minimize those things from occurring. So it's not inevitable. You can intercept and kind of help to target those concerns with specific ingredients as well.
Brilliant. So I guess that leads really nicely into one of the questions I was going to ask around clinical research. So I know that, Decium does an awful lot in terms of validating the products and around that clinical research. But how do you ensure that the clinical research that you do actually covers, all genders, all ages, all different skin types? Because I should imagine that's really difficult.
Yeah, 100%. I think this is a really, really important question. We want to make sure, one of the things that we've often done in The Ordinary is that we have now started doing it, but traditionally we didn't use people in our marketing because we wanted everybody to be able to see themselves using our products. And it's important that everyone has access to that. And that's also true when it's reflected in our testing. So we have our own clinical research team that's based in Toronto in our labs. We have 5 labs in total, over a kind of 150 different scientists with lots of background. But they will start in what we call the preclinical stages. So they will do testing in things like kind of skin cells or skin samples. And from that, they will then grow out and kind of build on that testing into humans. And when we get to that stage, they work extensively in the background to design how the study is kind of created. And what we do within that is we'll create what's known as inclusion criteria. Okay. And that inclusion criteria is what we expect from the testing house in order to fulfill our needs in a test. So one of the things that I always mention is that we try to aim for 30 people where we can. Some studies for like hydration, you might see lower numbers, maybe 20. But when it comes to anything clinical improvements in terms of signs of aging or uneven tone, 30 is the number we try to aim for, because first of all, that's the number in science that we look at for what we call statistical significance. Okay. And it sounds really complicated, but it either means that yes, according to all the complex statistics and the numbers you've calculated, that is a genuine result. It's not just an anomaly. You haven't just seen that happen out of the blue. So that's why we aim for 30. The other parameters there as well are things like phototypes. And when we talk about phototypes in skincare, phototypes is a kind of clinical evaluation or a way of categorizing different skin tones and how they respond to light. And so that, or UV light in particular, that's really important to us to make sure that we provide a variety of different skin tones to ensure our products are suitable for that as well, for all those different types of people. Now, there are challenges depending on the time of year you do the testing. You don't want to test a product for uneven tone during the summer because that's when the sun's more likely to cause kind of discoloration inside the skin. So there are those factors that mean sometimes we have to test in specific countries which don't always have as much kind of diversity in their panels. But where we can, we try to aim to have people in every single of those phototype categories, again, to ensure that all skin tones are represented. Yes. And then there's the kind of more unique or very more kind of personal aspects per product. Yeah. So we talked about GF 15%. This is really one we wanted to look at for menopausal individuals. And so for that reason, we specifically chose that kind of age range. And we actually had as one of the inclusion criteria that the individuals were postmenopausal. Yes. So then there are more specific factors that we look at per product. Okay. Retinol, again, the age group there. Yes. If we look at salicylic acid, we tested that in teens as well to make sure. So there are all these kind of smaller aspects of things then that are dependent on each product. And SciComs, our legal team, our clinical research team, we all sit together and have these really important conversations to make sure that that's represented in our testing. Yeah. And then beyond the clinical testing, there's also the safety testing part of it as well, which we often don't talk about. But this is coming down to, is the product suitable for sensitive skin? So testing on a panel of individuals there. Growth factors, they're often a gentle alternative to retinoids. So that's why we wanted to test that on sensitive skin. So it's all of these smaller things then that add in together to create that kind of bigger picture as opposed to just the clinical test, but those kind of combining factors as well.
Fabulous. And I guess you would also listen to customer feedback as well. Yeah. So talking about customers.
Yes.
You gave us a question that we were going to ask our listeners in advance of the podcast, so we could talk through some of their questions today. Can you remember what the question was?
You'll have to give it to me again. Apologies.
That's okay. No, I do realise. So the question was, what is one myth or fact about menopausal skin that you've heard that you'd like to know more about, or you'd like to ask a skin scientist if you had the opportunity?
Yes.
So as you can imagine, we had a huge variety of responses and lots of responses. So what I've tried to do is just group them into areas for the ones that were very similar.
Yeah.
So we've already covered some of the things around, collagen decreasing.
Yeah.
Is that true? Well, obviously, you've told us that that's true, so that's fine. I've heard that skin gets much thinner during menopause and can't repair itself as easy. Is it true? Or is it about hydration and collagen loss? Well, again, you've talked about that, which is brilliant. Asking about retinol, is it too harsh? Some recommend it and some say it's just not right for us. Yeah. And I think you said use it, but also listen to your skin, didn't you?
Exactly.
One of the things that you sort of touched on, but we didn't talk about in great deal, I suppose people talk about during menopause, people having hot flushes.
Yeah.
And a lot of people asked whether there was actually a connection or a trigger between hot flushes and the rosacea flare-ups. Are you able to expand a bit around that? Because we've not covered that.
I haven't specifically dug into the relationship between those two. So there might be aspects that I'm not familiar with, but I can certainly speak to what I do know about the kind of two aspects of things. When it comes to rosacea, it's a really interesting one because we don't fully understand what contributes to it. When it comes to acne, we know a lot more about it, but there's still a lot of unknowns about rosacea. So it may certainly be connected in some ways, but when it comes to facial flushing during menopause, what we actually find the trigger or what seems to be associated with that is that a part of our brain, which is responsible for temperature regulation, there are some changes that mean that sometimes it's thrown a little bit off. So whereas a small change in temperature might not necessarily cause these kind of responses, typically during menopause, those small changes can actually trigger a much kind of more dramatic response. And so the facial flushing occurs when we may get a kind of small increase in temperature. And so the skin's response is to actually dilate the vessels inside the skin, which creates this redness at the surface. And what that is designing to do is to reduce or remove the temperature of the heat from the body. And so that's why we often will see this occur. There's a connection somewhere there with stress hormones as well. Okay. So we often see that people who are more likely to experience facial flushing are also more likely to have elevated levels of stress hormones like cortisol, which also increases at nighttime. So this is why you might experience increases in itching sensations at nighttime. It's all kind of slightly connected there as well. So for that reason, that's kind of one of the aspects that we see that facial flushing occurs. Now, there may be a connection there because we know that stress does also impact the skin. And we see that when stressful events occur, we get a flare with things like acne or dermatitis or in some cases rosacea. And so there may be a very indirect connection between those elevated stress hormones there and rosacea, but I've not specifically looked at the combination or the overlap of the two of them. So there's a little bit of background just there about what causes them, why they happen, but I don't want to kind of step too far into detail that is not my expertise.
It makes sense though, doesn't it? Yeah. Brilliant. And we've talked about it saying that some people claim that the skin becomes oilier after menopause, while others says it gets drier, which is the most accurate. And I guess it depends on your skin type, doesn't it?
100%, all of it, like, for example, my mum she's always had very oily skin. She's now postmenopausal. She's been through that process. And her skin is slightly less oily, but overall she'd still describe her skin as oily. So while we talk about these changes, as I mentioned earlier, this is what we see as the kind of average experience, and each individual's experience will change. Some people may see that they get an increase in kind of sebum level or sebum production, and that can contribute to acne. The other factor to kind of mention here as well is that often, and we haven't touched on this yet, but HRT, hormone replacement therapy, and that in itself can also then introduce the factors that can impact all of these things. So you might see changes in your skin that are associated with HRT as well. So that's just another factor to bring in there, in the fact that your skin's naturally going through changes, and introducing HRT can also contribute to some of those. Hopefully help to offset some of the ones that we don't kind of love as much, but there is that aspect that plays into it as well.
Just in terms of, I suppose, a summary for our listeners, what would you say are the earliest signs to look out for in terms of skin changes as somebody's entering the stages of menopause?
So I think some of the first things that you will start to see are things like the fine lines, and typically these will kind of pop up around the eye area, which we call a crow's feet. You see the frown lines starting to appear here, which are sometimes called 11 lines. You also have forehead wrinkles that sometimes form. You get this one here, which is called the nasolabial fold.
I call it my laughter lines.
The laughter lines as well. And also these ones here, which are sometimes called marionette lines. So those are the areas, but typically you'll start to see the fine lines start to form first of all. That will often be accompanied by the reduction in kind of firmness or that density that we see inside the skin. And then also you may see that kind of dullness or the kind of dryness that start to experience as well. So those are some of the first things, and they will kind of become more pronounced over time as well.
If somebody is wanting to try and reduce the effects, slow down, combat those signs, what would you say is a low effort or a low maintenance way of managing those?
So I think we've talked about two different ingredients, the growth factors and also the retinol. I love growth factors. It is one of my favorite products, and it's got to the point where I'm a low effort person, but I've got to the point of being able to introduce that into my regimen twice a day, morning and evening. So that makes it very easy and simple. It's water-based. It's very kind of gentle. It's been tested on sensitive skin. So that makes it really easy to fit into any regimen, just underneath your moisturizer, first step after cleansing. If you want even lower effort, that's where our retinol is a really great option. So our retinol was actually tested over a period of 10 weeks. For the first 2 weeks, users use the product once per week. And then from week 3 to 10, there onwards, it was twice a week. So for me, somebody that wants those visible results, but doesn't have as much time or effort or energy sometimes to put into my regimen, it makes it really easy to be able to say, okay, Wednesday and Sunday this week are my 2 Retinol days. Those are the days that I'm going to give the skin that extra punch that it needs. Not punch, but loving, kind cuddle. That's a slightly better way of putting it than a punch. But that's really kind of when Retinol, for me, steps into its own, because it gives those visible results, like great for helping with dark spots, renewing and smoothing, firming the skin, targeting multiple different signs of kind of wrinkles around the face area as well. So those are really 2 the great options. Your growth factors is great for somebody who may be a little bit more sensitive, water-based, so easy to fit into a regimen. And then those who want that kind of more low effort regimen, you have something like Retinol, which can be used twice a week. On the Retinol front, we do recommend PM use and also ensuring that you're using your SPF. But as we mentioned earlier on, hopefully everyone's already using their SPF. So that's that foundational part of the regimen that we haven't talked about, but it is the kind of most important part of all of it.
Brilliant. Because I do still think that there's so much misinformation and so much misunderstanding around the use of retinoids in whichever form that they are. And as you say, people that say they've got really sensitive skin, they can't use any form of retinoid. I personally don't believe that. I think it's about finding the right one for you. Yeah. What's your view on that?
I think you are totally right. There are so many different factors at play when it comes to retinoids. Like, are you going to encapsulate them? So that's putting them in a shell, which often typically reduces irritation. Are you going to use retinol? Are you going to use retinol? Yeah. Are you going to use a derivative? There's so many different things to consider when it comes to retinoids. But the overarching kind of thing that I would say about them is to just approach it very gently and take caution. So just like when you're introducing a really strong, like exfoliating acid, for example, take it slow. You might want to start with just once a week application, 1 to 2 times a week application, start at lower concentrations where you can and increase over time. 1 to 2 times a week to begin with. Then as your skin adjusts, maybe increase to 2 to 3 times a week every other day, and then eventually up to the kind of level that you want to. Now, that is a general rule. That's not for our retinol. Retinol is still twice a week, but for any kind of retinoids in general. The other thing to bear in mind is that another option people talk about is sandwiching. And I make a very specific kind of point of saying sandwich there, because I grew up in South Wales and my family doesn't have the D, so it's sandwich. And I've been taking the mick out of my entire life for that. So sandwiching is basically where we use...
You're talking to the wrong person when I come from the northeast about having a bad accent.
But yeah, so sandwiching basically is where we put a moisturizer down, then we apply the product we want to, and a moisturizer on top. And that just helps create that barrier. So starting slow, 1 to 2 times a week, and building frequency over time. Starting at a lower level and increasing that over time if necessary, but not always required. And also introducing sandwiching. That's another really kind of important tip that you can introduce. Overall, with anything, including retinoids, we do recommend patch testing. So on the inside of your forearm to make sure that it's going to be working well for your skin. And it's not always a direct translation. Something that is fine on your arm may still cause irritation on the face, but it's a good starting place.
Why do we recommend the forearm?
So this area is quite, particularly this area by the elbow, it's still quite a sensitive area in comparison to other areas. So for this area, it's a little bit more discreet, but still offers that ability to try something that's a bit more sensitive. 24 hours beforehand, see how you react to it and see how it goes. But then, as I mentioned, you know, you might find that retinoids aren't the right choice for you personally from your experience. And that's where things like peptides and growth factors are an alternative if you're trying out those retinoids and you're not finding the right one for you as well. So, some tips there.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I found the conversation fascinating. I think, you know, you've given us a lot of information there, but key is start slow. Find what's right for your skin and listen to your skin. 100%. And I guess that's the same at no matter what stage in your life journey you're
100%.
in.
I think we often are surrounded by so many trends and what's popular and recommendations from friends and dermatologists, but that's not necessarily personalized to you. And so this is one of the things I always talk about is fundamental to navigating your skincare journey is finding out what your needs are specifically. And that's why we want people to be empowered with education. So thank you so so much for having me today. Honestly, it's been such a pleasure. And I hope there's been some really interesting pieces to take away today that will help to inform those decisions on what purchases you make.
Absolutely. I mean, people will learn new things and then actually you'll just reconfirm things that people already know. So it's always really, really useful. I hope our listeners have enjoyed it. I hope that you've found something new and something that you can take away and that will help you with your journey and your skin. Just for listeners to be aware, The Ordinary have been very generous with us, and they've said that to celebrate this podcast collaboration, they are going to give us some free, and you talked about the squalene earlier, squalene and amino acid lip balms. So the first 100 customers that place an order following this podcast will be able to get that. The terms and conditions will be on our website, facethefuture.co.uk. And you'll also be able to get more information and shop The Ordinary products, the ones that we talked about today, and some more, and your SPF, of course. Thank you for listening and watching if you're doing that on YouTube or your favourite channel. Please don't forget to like and follow us on your favourite channel, and we'll see you again soon for more skincare and beyond. Thanks, and bye for now.